But that second quarter, the Indiana Fever just put the paws on them. The talent gap between the two teams was just unconquerable. It was it's like one of a Power 5 college football team going up against Tomato Can University, and in the first quarter, it's somehow a 14-10 game. Tomato Can University giving it everything they have, and then eventually, the talent disparity is just way too much. Power 5 ends up putting a beat down on Tomato Can. This is how this game felt. The Indiana Fever halfway.
The locker room door slammed, and the silence that followed was deafening. Monique Billings was gone from the game after just 6 minutes, and the Indiana Fever bench looked like they had seen a ghost. Stephanie White was absolutely livid on the sidelines, watching her rotation crumble in real time against the team they should have dismantled. This wasn't just an injury, it was a total collapse of the depth chart at the worst possible moment. Caitlin Clark was left out there, trying to lead a squad that suddenly looked like a shell of itself, and the frustration was boiling over.
Resting any players? Closer than I would hope. Depth is an issue. Stephanie White, you can say depth this and depth that. Depth is an issue with this team. Something alarming, it was fairly empty in that arena. I understand Kentucky Derby, but dude, there were more people in my chat during the live stream. Shout out to everybody in the live stream, by the way, that seemed to come to Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Salute to all you guys. Injury update. Monique Billings, with a right ankle injury, will not return to tonight's game. Monique Billings went down early in the second quarter, I believe.
The atmosphere inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse was eerie, and the empty seats only added to the tension. People were saying the Kentucky Derby kept the fans away, but the real story was happening on the hardwood, where the talent gap was vanishing. When your veteran leader walks to the locker room with an ankle issue and doesn't come back, it exposes every single crack in the foundation. Stephanie White knows the clock is ticking, and her expression said everything the cameras couldn't capture. The depth is not just thin, it is dangerously non-existent as the regular season approaches.
What happened during the broadcast? The broadcast cut at one point, and then for about the entire third quarter, we got no announcers. The play-by-play went bye-bye. There was no announcers, there was no score. Did the play-by-play crew leave early? Seriously? Did these guys put in their 2 weeks and said, yeah, I'm out of here? The boss has said, all right, see ya. They're like, oh, guys, we still have the fourth quarter to go. That second half was a very long 20 minutes of gameplay. That second half was a very long 20 minutes of gameplay. Let's take a look at some of the.
It was supposed to be a routine tune-up against the Nigerian national team, but it felt like a nightmare scenario for the coaching staff. Halfway through the first quarter, the score was a staggering 16-10. For a team led by the number 1 overall pick and a returning Aliyah Boston, that is simply unacceptable. It was like watching a Power 5 college football team struggle against a tiny university that nobody has ever heard of. The talent disparity should have been a canyon, but for those opening minutes, it felt more like a crack in the sidewalk that the Fever were tripping over.
Putting the moves on Nigerian national team over here. Oh. Spin fadeaway, Kobe. That's what we would say back in my day. Taking her off the dribble. Spin fadeaway, Kobe. Nice. CC getting those moves in. Another look at that. We Caitlin Clark. Then we got Caitlin Clark with a nice pass backdoor to Sophie Cunningham. A cutting Sophie Cunningham. Whoop. Threading the needle in between 3 Nigerian defenders. 23, the person on Sophie. And number 10 right there, in between 3 defenders. Give me that.
Stephanie White has been preaching about roster depth since she arrived, but tonight proved that her concerns were justified. When Monique Billings went down with that right ankle injury, the entire energy of the bench shifted from support to survival. Billings had 7 points and 2 boards in just 6 minutes of action, showing exactly why she is vital to this rotation. Losing her meant the front court was suddenly light in the ass and looking for answers. You could see the gears turning in White's head as she realized just how vulnerable this team is when one piece of the puzzle goes missing.
threading the needle in between 3 Nigerian defenders. 23, the person on Sophie, and number 10 right there, in between 3 defenders. Give me that. Steve Nash in the building. Very nice. Caitlin Clark with another pass. Oh, a one-hand. This pass is nice. A one-handed zinger to Michaela Timpson. Oh, yeah. We'd like to see this. We definitely like to see this. AB to CC. Pump fake. Love to see that. Boom. Perfect zip pass to Michaela Timpson for the N1. Michaela Timpson. The least we can ask of these players is to improve. The least we can ask is to improve.
Caitlin Clark was trying to do it all, as usual, but even her magic has limits when the supporting cast is struggling to find their rhythm. We saw the flashes of brilliance, including a spin fadeaway that looked exactly like a vintage Kobe Bryant move. She was taking it off the dribble and creating space where there was none, but the underlying issue remained that the Fever were playing down to their competition. The highlights were there, but the consistency was missing, and that is exactly what makes a coach like Stephanie White lose her mind during a high-stakes preseason evaluation. Team.
First quarter, after the first quarter, the Indiana Fever were leading 32-18. Second quarter, we put the pause on them 38-11. I'm telling you, the second quarter, we completely blew them out the building. And then in the second half, the Indiana Fever outscored the Nigerian national team 35-28. Raven Johnson was in there a lot of that. Michaela Timpson was in there a lot of that. Mahisha Allen was in there a lot of that. Damaris Dantas was in there a lot of that. This team needs depth. Stephanie, Methany, Amber, Kelly, whoever, Lynn, Simon, whoever's listening, this team needs depth. You have to get depth.
The broadcast itself seemed to reflect the chaos on the floor, as the feed cut out and left fans in the dark for nearly an entire quarter. No announcers, no score, and no play-by-play felt like the production crew had just put in their 2 weeks' notice and walked out early. It made the second half feel like a very long 20 minutes of gameplay that nobody was truly prepared for. While the fans at home were guessing the score, Stephanie White was on the sideline witnessing a bench unit that was struggling to pull away from a national team that had no business being that close.
Kelly, whoever, Lynn, Simon, whoever's listening, this team needs depth. You have to get depth. The fact that our bench is competing with the Nigerian national team is nasty work. I don't like to see that. 15-12 in the third quarter, with Raven Johnson playing a lot of that, with Michaela Timpson playing a lot of that, with Mahisha. That's not good. I know nobody wants to overreact because of preseason, but we can have takeaways. And we've taken that away every single game. And again, here against Nigeria.
Aliyah Boston's return was supposed to be the headline, but her performance left more questions than answers. After missing the first 2 preseason games, she finally suited up, but finished with only 1 rebound. As a hub of the offense, she did manage 6 assists, but that lack of presence on the boards is a massive red flag. When your star center ends crashing the glass, it puts an immense amount of pressure on the guards to play perfect basketball. The chemistry with Clark is clearly still a work in progress, and time is a luxury that this Indiana squad simply does not have right now.
0 for 2. Again, if it's up to me, give me Raven Johnson in that rotation over Ty Harris. Let's see what we could do, trying to bring in some size, because this team definitely needs roster improvement. Just like that, AB missed the first 2 games. Now she's back. Monique Billings, she gets hurt today. Hopefully it's not big, but we can't be successful with this front court being so thin. Thin in terms of depth and thin in terms of being light in the ass. Got to improve. Regular season starts a week from today, May 9th.
The term nasty work was thrown around to describe the bench performance, and it is hard to argue with that assessment. Seeing the Fever backups competing neck and neck with Nigeria in the third quarter was a slap in the face to anyone who thinks this team is ready for a deep playoff run. You have players fighting for roster spots who are supposed to be hungry, but instead they looked hesitant. Stephanie White is a winner, and she expects her players to have that killer instinct regardless of who is across from them. Tonight, that instinct was missing in action for long stretches, Mikayla Timpson is one of the few bright spots who actually seems to be listening and improving her game. She knows she isn't a three-point threat or a mid-range specialist, so she is focusing on being a force around the rim. She finished with 12 points and 5 rebounds, showing that she can be a reliable target for Caitlin Clark's zipping passes. But even with Timpson's growth, the overall depth remains a glaring issue that could haunt the Fever all season. One player taking a step forward doesn't fix a roster that feels like it is missing 3 or 4 key rotation pieces. The guard rotation is becoming a major point of contention for the coaching staff as the regular season looms. Raven Johnson continues to look like a standout, and many are calling for her to take over the rotation spot currently held by Ty Harris. Harris struggled significantly, going 0 for 3 from the field and failing to make an impact when the team needed a steady hand. If it comes down to a choice between the two, the momentum is clearly shifting toward Johnson. Stephanie White has some incredibly difficult decisions to make before the May 9th deadline against the Dallas Wings. A 3-guard lineup featuring Clark, Mitchell, and Johnson is an intriguing possibility, but it comes with a massive set of risks. Sure, they would be fast and could push the tempo like crazy, but they would also be severely undersized. In a league where size and strength dominate the paint, being small can shoot you in the foot during the fourth quarter. It is a high-risk, high-reward strategy that Stephanie White might be forced to use simply because she doesn't have enough reliable bigs to fill out a traditional rotation. The desperation is starting to show in the tactical adjustments. Sophie Cunningham showed her veteran grit by being aggressive the moment she touched the ball. She was surveying the floor and pulling up for triples without a second of hesitation. That is the kind of confidence this team needs from everyone, but it felt isolated. When Sophie and Caitlin are the only ones looking to punish the defense, it becomes too easy for opponents to scheme against them. The Fever need a balanced attack, but right now it feels like a few stars are carrying a heavy load while the rest of the roster is just along for the ride, and that is a recipe for disaster. The second quarter was a glimpse of what this team could be when everything clicks into place. They put the pause on Nigeria with a 38-11 run that looked like a professional team finally waking up. But the fact that they needed a wake-up call against this level of competition is what is driving the coaching staff crazy. You cannot afford to have slow starts in the WNBA, because teams like the Liberty or the Aces will bury you before the first timeout. That inconsistency is exactly why Stephanie White was seen fuming as the lead fluctuated throughout the night. Monique Billings' injury report is the most anticipated piece of news for the franchise right now. If she is out for any extended period of time, the frontcourt depth moves from concerning to catastrophic. She was providing a spark that nobody else on the bench could replicate. Her ability to space the floor while still being a threat in the paint gave Clark and Boston the room they needed to operate. Without her, the floor shrinks, and the passing lanes that Caitlin loves to exploit suddenly disappear. The ripple effect of one ankle injury could change the entire trajectory of their season. Kelsey Mitchell did her part by being efficient and scoring 17 points on just 9 shots. She is a professional bucket getter, and her chemistry with the new-look offense is one of the few things that seems stable. But even her performance was overshadowed by the looming sense of dread regarding the roster cuts. There are players on this team who were going to be cut in the fourth quarter who were struggling against the national team. That is a terrifying reality for a franchise that has spent years trying to rebuild its culture and become a destination for top-tier talent. The empty arena was a silent critic of the current state of the Fever. Even with the hype surrounding Caitlin Clark, the fans didn't show up in the numbers expected for a preseason finale. It sends a message that the community is waiting to see if this team is actually for real before they commit their time and money. Stephanie White knows that winning is the only way to fill those seats, but winning requires a complete roster. You can't sell a vision of greatness when your bench is getting outplayed by a group that hasn't had a fraction of the training time or resources. The pressure on the front office is mounting as the May 9th season opener against Dallas approaches. They need to figure out how to bolster this depth immediately or face a very long and painful summer. Whether it is through trades or scouring the waiver wire for veterans who were surprisingly cut, something has to change. You cannot go into a regular season with a frontcourt that is this thin and expect to compete with the giants of the league. The talent is there at the top, but the foundation is made of sand, and it is starting to shift under the weight of expectations. Caitlin Clark finished with 12 points and showed that she can still get her calls and get to the free throw line. She is adjusting to the physical play and finding ways to be effective even when her shot isn't falling at a high clip. But you could see the frustration on her face when her perfect passes were dropped or mishandled by teammates who weren't ready for the heat. She is playing at a speed that the rest of the depth chart is struggling to match. If they don't catch up soon, the gap between the starters and the bench will become an unfixable divide. Damaris Dantas provided 16 points off the bench, which was a much-needed boost in a game filled with offensive droughts. She showed that there is some life in the second unit if they can just find some consistency. But one good game in the preseason against a non-WNBA opponent doesn't erase the weeks of struggling depth. Stephanie White is looking for players she can trust in crunch time, and right now that list is incredibly short. The margin for error is razor thin, and the Fever are currently walking a tightrope without a safety net in sight. The Nigerian national team deserves credit for being competitive, but the Fever should have ended this game in the first 5 minutes. The fact that it was a 6-point game halfway through the first quarter is a testament to the lack of focus and intensity. Stephanie White expects a championship standard from the moment the ball is tipped. Seeing her team go through the motions against a tomato-can opponent is enough to make any coach lose their cool. This was supposed to be a statement game to head into the regular season with momentum, but instead it felt like a warning. As we look toward the start of the regular season, the health of Monique Billings and Aliyah Boston is the top priority. Without those two anchors, the Fever are just a collection of talented guards with nowhere to go. The depth issue isn't just about points. It is about defense, rebounding, and leadership. When the starters sit down, the lead shouldn't evaporate. Stephanie White is fighting an uphill battle to instill a winning culture in a group that still hasn't figured out how to support its superstars. The clock is ticking, and the answers are nowhere to be found. Every takeaway from this preseason has pointed to the same glaring flaw. The Indiana Fever are a top-heavy team that is 1 or 2 injuries away from a complete disaster. The talent gap between the starters and the bench is a chasm that could swallow their season whole. Stephanie White is furious because she knows the potential of this group is being held back by a lack of investment in the bottom half of the roster. They have the generational talent in Clark, but they haven't given her the army she needs to actually go to war in this league. The regular season starts in just 1 week, and the Indiana Fever are heading into it with more questions than answers. The Monique Billings situation has cast a dark shadow over what should have been a celebratory night. Caitlin Clark is ready to take over the world, but she can't do it alone, certainly can't do it if her teammates are walking out or getting carried off. Stephanie White has her work cut out for her as she tries to turn this struggling depth into a functional unit. The world will be watching on May 9th to see if the Fever can finally find their footing.